Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Welcome to another Alien role-playing game related video. Today we're going to be sort of diving into the meat and potatoes of the Alien RPG, because this video is going to be all about skills. We're going to talk about what the various skills are, situations that you might use them in, as well as how to roll them, the different types of skill checks that you might make in the game, what happens if you fail and you want to, not fail, and things along those lines. So we're going to talk about all the skill-related stuff. For this video, I'm going to be referencing the Alien Core rulebook, so the hardcover rulebook. However, all the information for skills can be found also in the Alien RPG Starter Set rule booklet. They would have all the same information for skills because that is meant to be standalone book resource that you can use as well for the box sets. But we're going to be looking at the hardcover book here. So for the Alien Core rulebook, if that's what you're using, the section on skills starts on page number 57. And it gives us our skill descriptions, how to roll them, and the various things that you can do with them. So I'm not going to focus on them, like the descriptions of them in the rule book as of yet, but we will talk about those a little bit later on. But that's where the section starts. So the first thing we want to do is just take a look at what skills we have available to us in the Alien role-playing game. So for that, we're just going to zoom in a little bit on our character sheet here. So this is Jack Harris. This is the Colonial Marshal we made in an earlier video in this series. As I said, we'd be, referencing him in future videos. So this is where we're going to begin that. So as you can see, we have our 4 different attributes here. We have strength, we have agility, we have wits, and we have empathy. And each attribute has 3 different skills associated with it. So for strength, we have heavy machinery, close combat, and stamina. Heavy machinery is essentially just, to operate, to fix, or to at least temporarily fix, or even to dismantle or destroy, basically industrial equipment, or anything that's sort of driven by engines and not necessarily like advanced technology. So you would use it for things like, I believe the power loaders use heavy machinery, and fixing or repairing, mining equipment would fall under that. Fixing or repairing a motor vehicle would fall under heavy machinery, or, again, damaging it, or just jerry-rigging it to get it to work for a moment, or to do what you wanted to do for a moment. So that's what you would use heavy machinery for. Close combat is just for, that exact purpose. It's a combat-related skill, and we're not going to talk about combat in this video. We will discuss it in its own separate video where I go through and, tell you how to do combat, how to run it, and do a couple of examples, one against a humanoid opponent and one against a dastardly xenomorph. So we're not gonna worry about close combat or range combat in this video. We will get to it though in a later one, so just bear with me when it comes to that. Stamina, again related to your strength attribute. You use that for physical endurance. That could come in the form of strenuous physical activity, or to sort of like your constitution to fight off toxins or viruses or things along those lines. In Alien Covenant, you had like the black spores, and your ability to fight them off would be based on your stamina, for example. For agility, we have range combat. Again, we're not going to touch on that in this video, but we also have piloting, and that's just your ability to operate flying spacecraft in this particular game. The same rules I'm sure would apply to like Earth-based flying, like planes and stuff like that. But in the Alien RPG, it's mainly used in like space flight or space combat situations. And then we have mobility. So mobility is your movement-based skill. So if you're trying to like balance maybe in a precarious position, if you're walking across a narrow ledge, for example, you might use mobility. You can also use mobility to disengage in combat, but again, we'll talk about that in the combat video. You can also use mobility for like acrobatics or for stealth. So that's what you use in a stealth situation. For wits, we have observation, which is basically it's your perception, it's your ability to hear or to see things that may be hidden or not necessarily obvious. So that's what you use that for. Survival is for, you would use it in a situation where maybe you have to identify like a shelter, or to escape some sort of hazardous situation, like maybe you're on a planet with acidic rain, or certain vegetation, flora, fauna might be venomous. So you would use survival to, not not eat something venomous or poisonous, and to get out of like bad weather situations, to identify some things that you could use for shelter, things along those lines. And then we have Comtech, which is to fix, repair, hack, or basically do anything involving computers or communications technology. So hacking, like a mother mainframe system, or fixing a communication system, or even like using it to run a bypass to get past a security door. You would use Comtech for that. Finally, we have our empathy-related skills. So we have command, manipulation, and medical aid. Command is basically your ability to issue orders. You can use it to get people to essentially do what you want, just matter of fact, straightforward. But again, that's usually a situation that falls under something like a structure where you have like the Colonial Marines, for example. You have you have a higher ranking character that can order a lower ranking character to do something, even if they protest or have another course of action that they want to pursue. If you ever seen a movie or TV show where someone says that's an order, that's a command role example, basically. Manipulation is getting people to do what you want without having the authority as a rank to pull. So, you can use like subtle suggestion, or, like threats, or you could sort of, try to take a diplomatic type of approach, but you would use manipulation in those situations. So if you're trying to get someone to do something that's not necessarily their idea, you can use manipulation for that if you don't have the rank to pull for a command or the ability to do that with your talents. And then we have medical aid. So medical aid is a little bit different than a lot of the other skills. You would only use it in a couple of situations. So if you were injured in combat and you were reduced to 0 hit points, again, we'll go over more of this when we get to the combat video, but you enter a condition known as being broken. At that point, you roll for a critical injury, and then you sort of go from there. So with the critical injury, you can only do it if someone's broken. You can't just make a medical aid check just because someone took damage earlier. You basically have to treat it at the time in this situation. But you make your roll, and the amount of successes you get dictates how many hit points that you heal back. And we'll talk more about successes in a little bit here. So that's how that works. You also have to use medical aid in the event that somebody suffers a fatal injury. Most fatal injuries, with the exception of the final 4 in the critical injuries chart, will have a period of time that it takes before the character has to start making basically death rolls to stay alive. But if you have medical aid, you can treat someone to stabilize them, to get them out of that situation. So if they had a fatal injury, you can use the medical aid roll to make it that you basically, they're no longer fatally wounded, they're just wounded. And if that situation happens, you have to make a separate medical aid roll on your next turn in order to actually do the first aid where you give them hit points back. So if it's fatal, it takes a little bit longer to do all that stuff. So those are basically the skills. The Alien role-playing game uses a D6 dice pool sort of system or mechanic. So the way that you determine what you roll for your skill is you look at what the skill is, and you add whatever your rank in that skill is to the base modifier or the base attribute number that is associated with that skill. So let's just take a look at, say, observation. So Jack Harris is, he's called to a crime scene, and, someone might be around, or he's just making observation checks to see if he can gather clues or evidence or something that might help him in his investigation. So I have 3 in my observation, so I get to roll 3 dice for that. And then that's connected to my wits, and I've got 5 in my wits. So that gives me 5 dice plus my 8 dice, so or plus my 3 dice for 8 dice total. So I would roll all of these dice and hopefully get a single success. In the Alien RPG, a success is rolling a 6 on a D6. If you're using the official Alien role-playing game dice, it'll have this little symbol on it here. And you'll see the symbol in the rule books to determine like success and stuff like that. So it uses the symbol instead of the number because the number is actually pointless for rolling skills. It's just a success or nothing. So we've got our eight dice there. And one of the things I actually wanted to address really quickly, and I'm glad that that happened, and holy crap, that's a terrible roll. So you could, like, having 8 dice to roll and needing to only roll a single 6 on all those 8 dice sounds like it would make this really easy. But in practice, you can come into situations like this where out of 8 dice, only a single one succeeds, or out of 8 dice or more, you can realistically roll all those dice and not get a single 6. So it sounds easy to pass everything, but in practice, it's actually not that easy. And I've watched a lot of gameplay videos, like live play videos of people doing like the various scenarios. And I saw someone roll like 14 six-sided dice and only get like 1 success or no successes. So it's something that, can very easily happen. So I just wanted to point that out. And this is a prime example. But man, that's half the dice that I rolled for ones, which if I were doing that for any other system would really suck, but it doesn't matter in this one. It's just I didn't roll, it didn't roll a 6, so I don't have to worry about it. So there we go. We have, a success. So that means that I'm looking around the crime scene in this particular scenario and I find evidence. I might find a footprint, or I might find a bloody, handprint or something like that that I can use. So that worked out well in this situation. So we've got that. But let's just say I didn't roll any successes. Well, let's just say like that's what we had. That doesn't necessarily mean that I've completely failed the task. In the Alien role-playing system, and other RPGs have this sort of available to you as well, you can do what's called pushing the roll. So that's something that you can do either if you failed or if you're trying to generate extra successes for what's called stunts, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So let's just say I failed this check, which, again, I almost did. But I really want to try to do everything I can to succeed. So this system has a mechanic called stress, which I'm going to do a separate video on, so I'm not going to go into detail on it here. But basically what it is just a separate pool of D6s that are visually different enough that you can easily separate them and know which ones are which when you're rolling in the game. So if you're using the official dice, again, that you can get either separately or with the Alien RPG starter set, which is how I would recommend getting them, you get these yellow dice here, and these are your stress dice. So stress is good in a way because it gives you extra chances to succeed. Because as you can see on the stress dice, we do have the success symbol here. We do have the 6, so you can succeed with that. However, you also run the risk of panicking. So, and with the stress dice, if you roll a 1, if you're using just other types of D6s, or in this case, if you roll the face hugger, you go into panic, and we'll talk about that like in a future video. But I'm investigating, I want to push the roll. So what I do is I get to pick up and re-roll any dice on the table that didn't roll a success. So in this case, I don't have any. When I actually rolled the dice, I would have had 1. Let's just say I wanted more for stunts, which again, I'll get to in a moment. Then I can re-roll all these dice, but I add 1 to my stress level, which I'll just use like a little check marker to indicate that. So we take one of these stress dice and add them to our pool. So that now gives us, like I said, an extra chance to succeed, but the panic could be a problem as well. Again, that'll be a separate video. So then we re-roll, and in that case, it's actually good because that stress dice actually made it so that we succeeded. Again, 8 dice, not a single success, so it's not as easy as it initially sounds. But then we can use that for that. Certain talents that you can use, that you can get based on your profession, may give you the option to push particular skills a second time. If you do that, you go through the exact same process. You add an extra, you would add another level of stress. So in this case, I would have 2 stress dice, and you would roll both of those along with your regular pool. So that's sort of how that works. Now, certain situations may modify your skill roll based on how easy or difficult it is. So what that happens is you'll see modifiers in the book of like -1, 2, 3, or +1, 2, or 3. You just add or subtract D6s based on that. So let's just say I'm making an observation check to try to find clues in this crime scene. So I've got my 8 dice. However, the scene was sort of tampered with, or the other deputies were basically trudging through things and may have disrupted or even destroyed some of the evidence. So that might make the tasks a little bit more difficult. So if we go into the core rulebook here, and we get to our difficulty modifiers, we can see here they range from +3 to -3. Your average result or your average rolls wouldn't have any pluses or negatives. And generally speaking, while there is difficulty, it's something that you don't want to overly use or abuse. It's just certain situations may call for it. So let's just say that it's now a demanding task because my men have been trudging around and may have masked footprints, or they may have accidentally moved the body or something like that. So that would be a modifier of -1. So I take my 8 dice and I would subtract 1 from it because it's a -1 modifier. So now I'm rolling 7 dice, and luckily I still managed to get 1 success. So we've got that. Now let's just say that we have a situation where you have someone that's helping you. You can have other characters aid you in certain things. So maybe you're not the only one making the observation roll, or let's just maybe be another skill altogether. So for each person that's helping you, up to 3 people can aid you. So for each person that aids you, it gives you a +1 bonus to your roll. So that gives you an extra dice. So again, we have our 8 normally, but let's just say someone is helping us look or giving us information that might help us when we're investigating. So we would get an extra dice. So now we're rolling 9 dice instead of 8. And again, only a single success. So that's, again, sort of how that works. To aid a character, it has to make sense for you to do it, and you need to sort of explain what it is that you're doing to assist. But again, up to 3 people can do that. So in theory, you can get up to a +3 modifier from that. It's really good in situations where you have penalties. You can use that to sort of offset it. So that's sort of how that works. Now, some skills are just straightforward in the way that they're done or the way that they're rolled. Others may be a little bit different because you may have a situation where you have an entire group trying to accomplish the same thing. Typically speaking, group checks are normally only used for things like moving stealthily or for making observation checks to notice other people or other things moving stealthily. So for a group check, what you would do is compare everyone's skill numbers and values by adding so let's just say we're doing stealth for this one. Each player would look at what their mobility is, add it to their agility stat. So in this case, I don't have any ranks in mobility, but I do have 4 agility, so I would still have a total of 4 in that skill check. So for stealth, you would all compare what your stealth values are, and the person with the lowest would make the roll. Because in a stealth situation, you're only as stealthy as your least stealthy person. So with a 4 total, it's not likely that this character would be the least stealthy or the clumsiest person in the group. So you could have someone with an agility of 2, and again, no points in mobility. So they might make the roll, or they might have a 2 agility and 1 mobility. So there are situations where you would have less than that. So let's just say most of the people in the group have 5 or 4 or 6 or something like that for their agility and the mobility combined, but one person only has the base 2 that goes into the attribute and no ranks into it. So that person would roll the mobility check. And let's just say in this situation, they still managed to succeed, which is good, but it's highly unlikely that would happen. So again, just look at another situation, same thing, maybe later on, and that person costs the party. However, that's for stealth. So again, you're only as stealthy as your least stealthy character. But if you're trying to make a group observation roll, for example, so your whole group is, on the lookout for movement, you would sort of base it off whoever has the highest. So in that case, it might be my character again with the 8 dice that they would be rolling. So they would roll that. So it depends on the situation. It, again, sort of depends on logically how you would sort of go to perceive, how a group check might play out. So those are sort of the 2 options for that. So we've got group checks. You also have situations where you might roll what's called an opposed check. And using stealth as that opposed check sort of scenario, you would have your stealthy character trying to sneak past your person that might be there to observe them. So let's just say, again, we're going to our crime scene situation, and let's just say the perpetrator is actually still there and trying to sneak away while I'm investigating the crime scene. We're just going to go with my observation of 8 total, 3 for the skill, 5 for the wits attribute. And let's just say that they have a dexterity of 3, and they have 2 ranks in mobility, so that would give them 5 dice. Ordinarily, you wouldn't roll panic dice for them, but I just want you to be able to easily tell which dice are which and be able to roll them both at the same time. So the person's trying to sneak away from me. And in this case, they didn't get any successes, and I actually got 2. So the way that this works is the person that gets the higher number of successes wins the opposed roll. So the person trying to sneak past failed because they didn't get any successes, and I got a single success, or I got at least a single success. There are things you can do with extra successes beyond that. Again, we'll talk about stunts at a very, very short period of time here. So we'll look at that then. But for me to beat this character who didn't get any successes, I had to roll at least 1. But let's just say that they got a success. Well, in this case, I just succeeded over them because I got 2. So I needed to get more than them in order to spot them. For me to go beyond that, I would have to have gotten 3 successes or more. So what happens in a situation where you roll more successes than you need? Each additional success beyond the first one for the vast majority of skills will generate what's referred to as stunts. All right, so in the core rulebook, the skill section, like I said, starts on page 57. But for stunts, we want to start looking at the descriptions beginning on page 64. So for stunts, like I said, the way that you generate them is for each success you roll beyond what's the minimum requirement for you to succeed on the skill check in the first place, which is generally just anything above the first success that you get. You can choose from the following stunts. Each skill will have their own stunts. A few skills don't actually have stunts. We'll talk about those as we get to them. We're just going to go through them in the order that they appear in this book. So we're starting with our strength-based skills here. So for heavy machinery, starting with that one, for each success you roll beyond the first, choose 1 stunt applicable to the situation. So I could get a +1 modifier to a later skill roll relating to this one. So if I make a heavy machinery roll and I'm using it to repair some industrial equipment, I get a success, an extra success, I decide to use that +1 modification. Keep in mind, +1 means an extra dice added to my pool beyond just my attribute added to the skill level. So we've got that. So that one you can do. When you've got this, so you don't need to roll to overcome the exact same challenge in the future. It only applies, I think, the first time. But so let's just say you used your heavy machinery to repair an engine on a vehicle that you used to drive away. A little bit later on, the engine breaks down again, so you need to repair it again. But because you had an extra success, if you chose this one at that time, again, you have to choose these when you get them, and then you just sort of make notes of which stunts you went with, because they will be something that applied later on. But we chose that you've got this one, so later on the engine breaks down. I don't need to re-roll to repair that same engine. I could just use the stunt to fix, and we can go again. So there's that. There's one here that says you do it quickly and half the time it would normally take. So this is great in situations where you're pressed for time. If there's a group of enemy soldiers coming towards you or xenomorphs running down the hall and you really need to get that engine going, you can do it in half the time, which is great. For heavy machinery, you can also just break the machine permanently, meaning that nobody can fix it. It's bricked and that's it. Another option is you act quietly, so maybe you're able to repair something without generating noise like you normally might. Or you have the option to show off. So showing off or impressing someone is something that appears in a lot of these. Basically, you can use those in situations where nothing else really applies, or if you have extra successes that you just want to spend and you've already chosen the big ones that you needed or wanted for later, or you just do it for like role-playing situations or for storytelling purposes. You have like rivals, for example, with your character. So if a rival character tried the skill and they failed, you could step in, and if you got the extra success, you could actually do the you show off one to sort of rub their noses in it. So it's not anything that affects the mechanics of the game, but it's something that you can use to tell for story purposes. for a funny situation or to be able to role play something out. So it's just kind of neat that those are there. If there's nothing else that you can really choose from, or you've already chosen other ones. Stamina. So we're going to move on to stamina next. So for stamina stunts, for each extra success you roll beyond the first, you can give someone an automatic success to a PC in the same situation as you. So let's just say you're both in a scenario where you're having to hold your breath maybe because you're underwater or something like that, and you get an extra success. You choose this, a character with the lowest stamina, maybe they fail their roll. You can choose to give them a success instead so they don't have to bother with the roll, or it can offset a failure on a roll. So you can do that. You can get yourself a +1 modification to a later skill relating to this one. Or you're hardened by the experience and you don't need to roll to overcome the exact same challenge in the future. So if it's a breath holding thing, you may want to consider like the amount of time that you held your breath, and beyond that you would need to start rolling again. So that could be how that works. Or if you're using it to fight off a pathogen or poison, and you get the stun, you're hardened by it, so that poison may not affect you in the future. So sort of stuff like that. Or again, you could impress someone, because why wouldn't you? We're not going to go over the combat ones in this video, so we'll talk about those in the actual combat video. So let's just move right on to mobility. So for mobility, the stunts you have is you can give a success to another PC in the same situation. So maybe you're on a narrow ledge and you're walking across it, you get the extra success. So you choose this stunt, and the next person going, they have a low mobility, or you just don't want to risk anything happening to them, or they fail their roll. You can use the stunt to give them a success right away. Or you can give yourself a +1 modification to a later skill roll relating to this one. Again, sort of similar circumstances. So if you rolled this for balancing on a narrow ledge, for example, you wouldn't be able to give yourself a +1 modification to stealth later on, because it's not the same kind of situation. So you just have to keep stuff like that in mind. But if you do really well on your stealth roll, you could actually choose this so that you get a +1 modification later on to a stealth roll, but it has to be the same kind of situation. Or again, you can impress someone. For piloting, these again are pretty straightforward. There's only two to choose from. One of them is that you show off, which, a pilot, you buzz the tower or something. Or you gain a +1 modification to a later skill roll relating to this one. Again, there's a lot of repetition once we get through them, but they're good stunts to choose from, so I'm not necessarily complaining. Range stunts, again, we'll talk about in range combat, or in the combat video that we do a little bit later on. Observation, the stunts. For each success that you roll beyond the first, you can ask one of the following 3 questions. So the first one is it coming for me? Are there more of them close by? Or the third question is, how do I either get in, get past, or get away from whatever it is that you're observing? So we've got that. Again, here we have our group observation. And it tells you sort of how that goes. Moving on to Comtech, communications technology or computer technology. The stunts are you gain a +1 modification to a later skill roll related to this one. You don't need to overcome the exact same challenge. So, for example, you run a bypass on a security door. Later on, you come across a security door that's the exact same mechanism, exact same security protocols, or exact same security codes or clearance to get through. You don't have to roll, you just automatically do it. You do it in half the time it would normally take. You get new or unexpected information, Game Master's or Game Mother's choice. You hide your tracks, so let's just say you are trying to hack into a computer system. You can use this to make it so they can't track you back, or trace the hack back to you. And again, you can always show off, because why wouldn't you? Survival. So survival, for each success you roll beyond the first, you can give one success to another character in the same trouble as you. So they're on the same planet, they're exposed to the same elements. For example, you can give them a success so they don't have to roll. You get a +1 modification to a later skill roll, or relating to the same thing, or you impress someone. So we got that again. Manipulation. So manipulation is typically done as an opposed roll. So if you're trying to manipulate someone, you roll your manipulation against their manipulation, and if you get higher than them, then you succeed. If they get higher than you, then you don't succeed, but they don't manipulate you back, sort of thing. So for this one, for each extra success you roll in excess of what you needed to win the opposed roll, because again, let's just say our opponent had 1 success, and I got 2 successes, that's the minimum number that I need to succeed, because I need to get more than them. In this situation, if I want to generate a stunt, I would need a 3rd success, and that gives me my 1 stun point, because 2 is what I needed to exceed their number, so this is my stun point. But for that, again, you could choose a different stunts based on how many extra successes you got beyond the ones you needed to succeed. So the first one is your opponent does what you want without demanding a favor in return. So just, being manipulated, for example, doesn't necessarily mean that you are mind controlled or charmed by them. It just means that you do what they want. However, again, in certain situations, you could do what they want, but in exchange for them doing something for you. So you can do like a quid pro quo thing, or in this situation, if you have the stunt, you can choose this one so that they just do what you ask and they don't ask for anything or seek anything in return. The second one is your opponent does more than you ask for example, giving you a useful piece of information. The details are up to the game mother, how that one goes. And then the other one you could choose is that your opponent is impressed by you, and this one actually has mechanical effect. So they're impressed by you, and they will try to help you in some way later on, as determined by the game mother. So again, an interesting way to do that one. Medical aid. So again, we sort of talked about how you make those rolls. So you can use the save a life option if someone is suffering from a fatal injury, and you succeed, and that's it. If you succeed, then they're no longer critically injured, or they're no longer dying or suffering from a fatal injury. Then you move on to your recovery check. So for recovery, there's no stunts. You just heal a number of hit points back equal to the number of successes that you rolled. So let's just say I rolled 3 successes, then whoever I'm using the recovery option on, and for that to be used, they have to be in a broken state. You can use that to give them that number of health back. If you roll more successes than they have hit points, they just get their maximum health amount. You can't grant extra hit points based on, you can't bandage someone so good that they are healthier than they were before they suffered the injury, if that makes sense. For command again doesn't have particular stunts that you can do, just different things with the success. So for example, the only one that really, you worry about the number of successes on is if you're giving someone orders. So this is something you generally do with like Marines, or if you have the pull rank feature or talent, or you're in a combat situation, you can sort of give orders for people to do things. So in combat is a slow action, so you get a slow action and a fast action each turn. You can bark orders to another character. They must be able to hear you, even if via a comm radio. So you roll a command. For every success that you roll, they get a +1 modification to the roll when carrying out the order that you gave. So let's just say you're in combat, and there's these xenomorphs coming at you, and you're trying to bypass a security door. You can give orders to the person making the check to overcome it. And let's just say you got 2 successes. That gives them 2 extra dice that they can add to their CommTech roll when their turn comes along. So that can be pretty useful. It's something that I didn't really see used a lot, but it is something to keep in mind. Again, you sort of have to have, it's situational, but it is something to keep in mind. And that's it. So that's it for the stun points. So that's how stunts go. I guess the last thing that I should mention is you can always attempt a skill check even if you don't have any ranks in it. You just do the exact same process as before. So let's just say I'm trying to make a piloting check with my Colonial Marshal, who is very much fond of staying on the ground, but he's in a troop ship, and maybe the pilot's disabled and he's the only one there to take the controls. So for piloting for him, I would take my ranks in piloting, which is 0, add it to my agility of 4. So he still gets 4 dice to roll in order to try to attempt that. And that's just basically how it works. So for heavy machinery, I would only get 2 dice for, and so on. So you can always attempt the roll. If you don't have ranks in it, you just use the base number. The last thing I want to talk about when it comes to checks or ability checks is very rare situations where there's no skill that applies. In those situations, you would just use the base stat. And there's one specific scenario, which is sort of covered in combat, but I'm going to talk about it here because it may not be a combat specific thing. You may just come across the situation where you have this opportunity. So it refers to empathy. So if you're in a situation where you come across someone and they are incapacitated or unconscious or sleeping, and your thought is that you want to basically, like slit their throats in their sleep sort of thing, or someone is defenseless, they're on their knees, they're begging for their life, and you've got a gun to their head to pull the trigger. So basically to kill a helpless person, you would actually have to make an empathy roll. So you can't just do it because you want to do it. So this is a situation you see in TV shows and movies all the time, where someone's holding the gun to someone's head and they're begging, or they're asleep and they don't see what's going on, and like their hand starts to get shaky, and in the end they just can't do it. So again, there's no skill that works with that, command or anything along those lines. You just make the base roll using your number here. So in this case, if I were to try to kill someone that's defenseless, I would need to roll empathy, and I get my 3 dice. And in this case, I didn't succeed. I failed the roll, which means my empathy didn't kick in, and I can actually do what needs to be done. So in this situation, I would pull the trigger basically. But if we got this instead, then my moral compass kicks in, my conscience kicks in, and I just can't bring myself to pull the trigger. So I wanted to mention that here because that's something that someone might ask. And yeah, so there's very few situations where there wouldn't be a skill that would apply to something, but in those situations, you just use the base numbers. And the very specific option or example of that is empathy to try to kill someone that's unarmed. Anyway, that was my video on the various skills in the Alien RPG. Hopefully that helped. There are certain things that we didn't discuss in this video or that we just barely touched on. So if you have questions about the skill rolls themselves, just the base skill rolls or opposed checks or group checks, let me know in the comments below. Just keep in mind that the combat system, so for close combat or range combat, that's going to be touched on in its own video in the future. And the next video that I do in this series is actually going to cover the panic and stress mechanics. So if you're questioning like what happens if you roll a face hugger dice, basically you roll the face hugger or you roll a 1 on your stress dice, I'm going to cover that in a later video. The only reason I even talked about the stress dice here is because it's an important part of pushing your skill rolls. And I thought about saving the pushing a skill roll for the panic and stress video, but I want to just cover as much as I could in this one. So hopefully that sort of helps you understand how that works, how the skill rolls work. And I hope you enjoyed the video. So that's, like I said, that's skills. That's covering skill rolls, how to determine how many dice that you roll, what the modifiers of like +1 or -2, or how that stuff affects your pool, how you succeed, how you fail, what happens if you get extra successes. So I hope that all helped. If you have any questions related to the topics I discussed in this video, like I said, let me know in the comments below and I'll try to get to them as soon as I can. Hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope you come back for the next video in this series where we're going to be looking at stress and panic. So thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you hopefully for that next video. Until then, take care.